GB News can confirm that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has relocated to a property on the Sandringham Estate belonging to His Majesty the King.
He once moved through palaces like the rules did not apply to him, wrapped in privilege, untouched by consequence. But that illusion shattered the moment Prince Andrew was spotted at Sandringham Estate, driving in silence, his face cold, unreadable, almost defeated. This was not just another royal appearance. It was a chilling symbol of a fall from power that few thought possible. Stripped of status and surrounded by growing outrage, his return has sparked intense debate. So tell us in the comments, is this justice finally catching up, or something far more calculated unfolding behind the scenes? Let's dive in. The fall of Prince Andrew. For years, he moved as if the rules simply did not apply to him, as if consequence was something reserved for other people. Wrapped in privilege, protected by tradition, and backed by an institution older than most nations, he seemed untouchable. But then came that moment, quiet, almost ordinary on the surface, when he was spotted behind the wheel of a Range Rover, gliding through the still roads of Sandringham. His face told a different story. No confidence, no pride, just a cold, distant stare, like a man carrying the weight of something far heavier than public shame. This was not just another royal sighting. It felt like a crack in something once seen as unbreakable. The man people were looking at was no longer the same figure who once walked through grand halls with ease. This was someone diminished, someone cornered by forces that had been building for years. And what many once dismissed as a passing scandal had now turned into something much bigger, something that was shaking the very foundation of the monarchy itself. Because this was never just about headlines or public opinion. What was unfolding behind the scenes was far more calculated, far more deliberate. It was not chaos, it was control. A slow, steady dismantling of status, power, and identity. And at the center of it stood his own brother, King Charles III, a man determined to reshape the future of the crown, no matter how painful the process might be. For most of his life, Prince Andrew had known nothing but comfort. His world was one of constant service, where every need was met without question. Royal Lodge, with its many rooms and endless staff, was more than just a home. It was a symbol of a life lived without limits. Security followed him everywhere. Doors opened before he even reached them. And the flow of resources never seemed to stop. It created a reality where accountability felt distant, almost unreal. But that reality did not last. Everything began to change when decisive action replaced silent tolerance. Titles that once defined him were taken away. Honors that once brought pride were stripped back without ceremony. What had once seemed permanent suddenly became fragile. And then came the moment that made it impossible to ignore: his removal from Windsor. It did not happen in daylight. There were no announcements, no formal goodbyes. Under the cover of night, he was quietly moved, driven miles away to Sandringham. It was not presented as a choice, it was an order. And while the public reacted with shock, what they saw was only a fraction of the full story, because what followed was even more revealing. Back at Royal Lodge, the transformation was impossible to hide. The estate that once buzzed with activity now stood eerily still. Large containers appeared, filling up one by one with the remains of a life that had been carefully built over decades. Personal belongings, furniture, pieces of history, everything was being removed, sorted, discarded. Staff who once served him without pause were now clearing him out completely, leaving no trace behind. And the details only made it more striking. Nothing was to be left. Not a single item. Instructions were clear, final, and without room for negotiation. He did not return to oversee it. He did not stand there to witness what was being taken away. Others handled it for him, right down to the most personal items. Some things were not even preserved. They were destroyed, burned away in controlled fires, as if erasing more than just physical objects. It was not just a move, it was a message, a signal that there would be no reversal, no quiet return, no second chance waiting behind closed doors. The life he once lived was not being paused. It was being erased piece by piece. And with every item removed, every room emptied, the reality became harder to deny. This was not damage control. This was a complete reset. But even that was not the end of it. Because while the world focused on the visible fall, the titles, the eviction, the public humiliation, something far more explosive was building beneath the surface. Whispers began to grow louder. Questions that had once been avoided were now being asked more directly, and the deeper people looked, the more unsettling the picture became. Now, the most shocking twist is the sudden arrest that has left people reeling. But insiders are already hinting that this may not be the full story. Could there be something even darker still hidden from public view? Keep watching to find out. The royal arrest. Less than 3 weeks after that quiet, almost secretive departure from Windsor, everything changed in a way no one inside or outside the palace could have predicted. It was meant to be a day of private reflection, his 66th birthday. But instead of celebration, it became the moment his world cracked wide open. That morning, Andrew found himself at the center of a storm that could no longer be contained behind palace walls. Authorities moved in, and what followed was not just a brief questioning or a routine inquiry. It stretched into 11 long, exhausting hours in police custody. The allegation? That he had shared sensitive trade information linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Even the suggestion of such a connection sent shockwaves through the public. A royal figure, someone once protected by layers of tradition and privilege, now facing accusations that felt almost unthinkable. The reaction was immediate and fierce. People weren't just surprised, they were outraged. How could someone from within the monarchy, an institution built on duty and trust, be tied to something so deeply controversial? Officials confirmed that the investigation was ongoing, and although Andrew strongly denied every claim, the damage had already begun to spread in ways that could not be reversed. But the fallout wasn't limited to headlines or public anger. It reached into the very core of his life, stripping away the comforts and symbols that had once defined him. His departure from Royal Lodge was not just about leaving a residence. It marked the collapse of a lifestyle he had always known. The privileges disappeared one after another. The security detail that followed his every move? Gone. The steady financial support? Removed. Even the quiet presence of personal staff, who once handled every detail of his daily routine, vanished. Royal Lodge had been more than a home. It stood as a symbol of status, influence, and closeness to the heart of the monarchy. Spacious, grand, and filled with activity, it reflected a life of importance. Now that chapter was over. In its place came something far more humbling. He was relocated temporarily to Wood Farm, a modest property that felt worlds away from the grandeur he had left behind. And what awaited him next was even more striking: a small farmhouse on a Norfolk estate. Unlike the polished elegance of Windsor, this new setting carried a very different atmosphere. Reports spoke of damp grounds, constant maintenance issues, and an environment that felt neglected and isolated. For someone who had lived surrounded by luxury, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Insiders described it as a drastic downgrade, almost shocking in its simplicity. Boxes still marked with royal insignia lay scattered around, silent reminders of a past that no longer fit into his present reality. It wasn't just a move. It felt like a quiet exile. The shift also revealed something deeper, something that had long been hidden behind palace walls. Stories began to surface, shared by former staff and insiders who had witnessed his behavior over the years. They painted a picture that was difficult to ignore. This was not just a man adjusting to new circumstances. This was someone who had grown used to a world that revolved entirely around him. There were accounts of careless habits, of rooms left in disarray, of basic expectations ignored because someone else was always there to fix things. More troubling were the descriptions of his temper, sudden outbursts, sharp words, and moments of anger directed at those who served him. It suggested a mindset shaped by years of unchecked privilege, where even the smallest inconvenience felt like an unacceptable challenge. As those stories spread, they changed how people viewed the situation. It was no longer just about the allegations or the investigation. It became about the man himself, his attitude, his expectations, and the reality he had lived in for so long. The fall, when it came, felt even more dramatic because of it. And yet, as the spotlight remained firmly on Andrew, another figure began to emerge quietly in the background. Someone who had always been close. Someone who understood both the man and the system he came from. Let's uncover the surprising influence of Sarah Ferguson and the part she may have played in everything that followed. Sarah Ferguson's role in Andrew's downfall. Sarah Ferguson once seemed like a figure who could never truly fall, no matter how many storms gathered around her. Known widely as Fergie, she carried herself with a mix of charm, boldness, and unpredictability that made her impossible to ignore. But now, the story unfolding around her feels far darker, far heavier, and far more difficult to escape. Fresh documents released in 2026 have dragged her name back into a scandal many believed had already done its worst, reopening wounds that never truly healed. The newly revealed emails are not just shocking, they are deeply unsettling. In them, Ferguson's words paint a picture that feels almost unreal. She refers to Jeffrey Epstein in ways that have left even seasoned royal watchers stunned, calling him a legend and speaking with a strange familiarity that raises uncomfortable questions. There are messages that suggest offers of help, including mentions of giving him roles and even access to royal spaces. What may have once been dismissed as careless communication now feels like something far more serious, especially in the cold light of hindsight. But this is not just about what was said. It is about what those words now represent. For a family already struggling to contain reputational damage, these revelations strike at the very core of public trust. Behind palace walls, the reaction has reportedly been one of deep concern, even alarm, because when private messages become public evidence, they do not just tell a story, they reshape it entirely. At the same time, Ferguson's personal situation only adds to the sense of collapse. Her financial history tells a troubling story of instability and dependence. Several of her business ventures have quietly disappeared, dissolved, or shut down under pressure. Charitable efforts have faded, and reports of her stays in health retreats and clinics suggest someone trying to regain control of a life that has slipped dangerously off balance. For years, she lived within the protective shadow of royal privilege, supported in ways few outsiders could fully understand. That protection, however, is no longer guaranteed. Much of that security was tied directly to Prince Andrew. Their connection, though complicated by divorce, remained a constant thread. They shared spaces, lifestyles, and a level of comfort that blurred the lines between past and present. Royal Lodge stood as a symbol of that shared world, a place where old routines continued quietly, despite public scrutiny. But now, even that symbol is being stripped away. There are increasing signs that everything associated with that era is being cleared out, almost as if it never existed. Reports describe removal vans arriving discreetly, possessions being taken away, and entire sections of the estate being emptied. Palace sources insist this is routine, that nothing unusual is happening. Yet the scale and urgency tell a different story. It feels less like organization and more like erasure. And this shift is not happening by accident. King Charles has taken decisive steps to reshape the monarchy, drawing clear boundaries around who remains within its trusted circle. Andrew has been pushed firmly to the edges, excluded from key gatherings, and denied any meaningful return to royal duties. The message is unmistakable. There is no path back, no quiet reintegration waiting behind the scenes. For their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, the situation is painfully public. They are left to navigate a reality where their family name is constantly linked to controversy, their roles uncertain, their future within the institution increasingly unclear. Every new headline adds pressure. Every revelation deepens the divide between past identity and present reality. Meanwhile, Andrew himself appears caught in a silent struggle. Once a man who thrived at the center of attention, he is now seen only in passing moments, driving through familiar roads with a face that reveals little but suggests everything. The life he once knew has narrowed dramatically, reduced to quiet appearances and careful distance. Yet history shows that stories like this rarely fade into silence. They linger, resurface, and often return with even greater force. So the question remains, are we witnessing just one isolated moment, or the first sign of something far bigger unfolding beneath the surface? Because when you look closely, that quiet scene at Sandringham may be hiding more than anyone expected. What does it truly mean? Sadie Tund. The Sandringham symbolism. It wasn't the speed of the car or the route he took that caught people's attention. It was the silence, the stillness. The image of Prince Andrew behind the wheel, moving slowly through the quiet roads of Sandringham Estate, staring ahead with a face that revealed almost nothing, and yet, somehow, everything. No wave, no acknowledgement, no attempt to reconnect, just a cold, distant presence that immediately sparked a wave of public reaction. Because this wasn't just a man going for a drive. This was a moment loaded with meaning. For years, Andrew had been known for something very different. Confidence, ease, even arrogance. He carried himself like someone protected by centuries of royal tradition, someone who believed the system would always shield him. But in that single sighting, all of that seemed to vanish. What replaced it was something far more unsettling, a withdrawn figure, stripped of the boldness that once defined him, now reduced to a quiet silhouette moving through a controlled royal space. And that setting matters more than people realize. Sandringham is not just another estate, it is one of the most tightly managed and symbolically important royal environments in the United Kingdom, a place associated with family gatherings, tradition, and carefully curated appearances. Every movement there is noticed, every presence carries weight. So when Andrew appeared in that space, not as a central figure, but as someone almost hidden in plain sight, it sent a powerful message. This was not inclusion, this was containment. His body language only deepened that perception. Observers noted the rigid posture, the fixed gaze, the complete lack of expression. It wasn't just that he looked serious, it was that he looked disconnected, as if the world around him had shifted in ways he could no longer control. Gone was the ease of someone comfortable in their role. In its place was a man who appeared to be navigating a reality that had been forced upon him. And the public noticed immediately. Social media reactions, commentary, and headlines all focused on that same haunting detail. His face. Words like Stony, hollow, and defeated began to circulate. Not just as descriptions, but as interpretations, because people weren't just seeing a man. They were seeing what he represented. A royal figure once surrounded by privilege, now visibly marked by controversy and consequence. That's what made the moment so powerful. It wasn't dramatic in the traditional sense. There were no speeches, no announcements, no confrontations, just a quiet drive. And yet, it spoke louder than any official statement ever could. It told a story of distance, not just physical distance from the public, but emotional and institutional distance from the very system that once protected him. It hinted at isolation, at a life now lived on the edges rather than at the center. And perhaps most importantly, it showed how perception has completely shifted. Where there was once admiration, or at least acceptance, there is now scrutiny, judgment, and a lingering sense of disbelief. Even the choice of staying within Sandringham carries its own layer of meaning. It suggests control, limitation, a carefully managed presence that avoids unnecessary exposure while still maintaining a connection to royal grounds. Almost like a compromise between exile and belonging. But that balance raises even more questions. Because if this is what his life looks like now, restricted, watched, and stripped of its former influence, then what exactly remains for him? What does a royal figure become when the titles fade, the duties disappear, and the public turns away? Stay with us as we uncover the current state of Andrew, the prince without a role. There was a time when his schedule was filled with ceremonies, foreign visits, and carefully staged appearances that reinforced his place at the heart of the monarchy. Today, the reality for Prince Andrew looks strikingly different. Quiet, restricted, and almost unrecognizable. The titles may still exist in name, but the function behind them has all but disappeared. What remains is a life that feels paused, as if the world moved forward while he was quietly left behind. His daily routine no longer carries the structure of royal duty. There are no official engagements, no charity patronages to attend, no public responsibilities to fulfill. Instead, his days are reportedly shaped by isolation within royal grounds, often limited to private walks, controlled movements, and a life far removed from the public-facing role he once embraced. The shift is not just physical, it is deeply symbolic. A prince without purpose is not just a personal fall, it is an institutional distancing, and that distance is becoming harder to ignore. Financially, the change is just as significant. Without active royal duties, the steady stream of public-funded support has been dramatically reduced. Reports suggest a growing dependence on family arrangements, particularly under the oversight of King Charles III, who has taken a firm stance on limiting both visibility and financial backing. This isn't just about cutting costs, it's about sending a message, one that makes it clear that privilege now comes with conditions, and those conditions are no longer negotiable. But perhaps the most telling sign of his current reality is not what he does, it's where he isn't. Major royal events, once a natural part of his life, now unfold without him. State ceremonies, public celebrations, and even significant family gatherings have seen his presence either minimized or entirely absent. It's not an official ban. There has been no dramatic announcement, no public declaration of exclusion. Instead, what has emerged is something far more subtle and arguably more powerful. A quiet, consistent pattern of distance that speaks louder than any formal decision ever could. Even at Sandringham Estate, where the royal family traditionally gathers, his appearances have been limited and carefully managed. When he is seen, it is often in controlled settings, away from the spotlight, with interactions that appear measured and brief. The message is clear without being spoken. He is present, but not included in the way he once was. This controlled visibility creates a strange contradiction. He remains a member of the royal family, yet exists on its outer edge, close enough to be recognized, but distant enough to avoid association. It is a balancing act that reflects the monarchy's attempt to protect its image while managing an internal complication that refuses to fully disappear. And for Andrew, this raises an even deeper question about identity. For decades, his sense of self was tied directly to his role. The uniforms, the titles, the access, they weren't just privileges, they were defining elements of who he was. Stripped of those, what replaces them? What fills the space left behind when a life built on status suddenly loses its foundation? Observers have noted that this kind of transition is not just difficult, it can be destabilizing. A life once driven by structure and recognition now unfolds in quiet uncertainty. There are no clear expectations, no defined responsibilities, and no obvious path forward. just a lingering presence in a system that has, in many ways, moved on without him. And yet, the story is far from over. Because even as he remains largely out of sight within the royal estate, the impact of his presence continues to spread far beyond its gates. Nearby communities have begun to push back, and media attention is growing more intense with each passing day. Every small movement, every fleeting sighting, is turned into a headline, fueling fresh waves of scrutiny. But what happens when even the quiet places meant to offer refuge begin to turn against you? Stay tuned. How a quiet village became the center of controversy. The move was supposed to happen quietly, almost unnoticed. Instead, it has stirred a wave of frustration that now hangs heavily over the small communities of Wolferton and the surrounding Norfolk countryside. For many residents, Andrew's arrival doesn't feel like welcoming a new neighbor. It feels like a burden has been dropped into their lives without warning. Some locals didn't hold back, telling reporters that it felt as though the royal household had simply dumped their problems right in the middle of their peaceful village. But the anger goes far beyond one man moving into a new home. What truly unsettles the community is everything that has come with him. For years, the area was known for its calm, its slow pace, and its sense of quiet privacy. That has now been completely disrupted. Wood Farm Cottage and the roads leading up to it, once simple country lanes where neighbors exchanged nods in passing, have been transformed almost overnight into crowded media hotspots. Television crews line the roads. Photographers wait for hours, hoping for a single glimpse. Even helicopters circle above, breaking the silence that once defined the countryside. The same villagers who used to enjoy the sounds of nature now find themselves surrounded by noise, cameras, and constant attention. What was once a peaceful retreat has started to feel like a stage, and the people living there never agreed to be part of the show. For many residents, this relentless media presence is more than just an inconvenience. It feels like an invasion. Daily routines have been interrupted, roads have become congested, and strangers now wander through areas that were once private and familiar. The sense of normal life has been replaced by something chaotic and uncomfortable, and for some, that has become unbearable. Several locals have made it clear that they simply do not want Andrew there. Some have spoken anonymously, describing the situation as something that just doesn't feel right. In a place that has always valued privacy and calm, his presence has introduced a level of attention and tension that clashes with everything the village stands for. One resident even suggested that if he had to be moved to the estate, he should have been placed somewhere far more isolated, somewhere hidden away from homes and public roads, where his presence wouldn't draw so much disruption. Reactions at nearby spots like the Sandringham Visitor Center have been just as direct. One elderly visitor questioned the entire situation, pointing out the contradiction of calling someone an outcast while they continue to live comfortably within the royal estate. Others hinted that while many villagers remain quiet in public, often due to connections with the estate, there is a shared feeling beneath the surface that this situation was neither expected nor welcomed. Behind the polite smiles and calm appearance of countryside life, frustration continues to grow. Residents who once gathered peacefully now find themselves watching as reporters fill the streets, vehicles block narrow roads, and curious visitors arrive in increasing numbers. What people say they want is simple: a return to the life they once knew, a life where Sandringham was associated with beauty, tradition, and quiet moments, not headlines and controversy. Even those who acknowledge that Andrew has not been convicted and remains legally innocent still struggle to accept the impact his presence has had. For them, the issue is no longer just about him, but about the disruption that follows him wherever he goes. Some believe that placing him somewhere deeply secluded would have avoided all of this, protecting both him and the community from unwanted attention. Instead, the opposite has happened. What was meant to be a quiet relocation has turned into a source of tension, drawing attention, criticism, and frustration. And now, a village that once thrived on peace finds itself at the center of a story it never asked to be part of. What's your take on Andrew's current situation? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.